Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Shades of Entrepreneurship. This is your host, Mr. Gabriel Flores. Today, I'm here with Corey Morris, and we are going to be talking about all things digital marketing. Super excited about this conversation. But before we get into all that, Corey, go ahead and introduce yourself. Who is Corey Morris?
Yeah, well, I'm excited about our conversation. Thanks for having me. The short story, without giving you reading off every one of my 20 years of my career, as I'm now a week away from hitting year 20, is I started my career early on in digital marketing before we were calling it digital marketing, back when it was online and internet marketing. And before everything was open source and easy to edit content on the web. And so I was a project manager, learned some HTML, parlayed that into SEO now 18 years ago. And from there, went on an entrepreneurial journey where I went from employee to owner of an agency, became an author, and there's a whole bunch of other things mixed in there as well.
Oh man, we are going to unravel all of that. So let's take it back to the very beginning. What made you decide to even become an entrepreneur? What was that kind of that first entrepreneurial endeavor? What was the first scratch?
Yeah, when I realized I wasn't necessarily the right aptitude or not aptitude, I mean, I did well in school, but it just wasn't as enticing for me to go into medicine like pretty much everyone else in my family, including my wife, who has doctor in their title. I started looking at other things. I thought I wanted to go maybe into finance, and loved like understand the math of how businesses work and money is made, and realized that I didn't also love numbers that much, and got into more into marketing. So I took some entrepreneurship classes. I'm thankful I went to a huge high school and had opportunity to take business classes in high school. And the marketing aspect of any product development or business and how you talk about it and present it really stood out to me. And so I latched onto that, carried that through college, and so I'd probably say it wasn't necessarily the lemonade stand, right, as a 6 year old, but maybe it was more in high school where I'm like, oh, these classes come easy to me, even though they were pretty challenging. I'm like, this is my passion. This is where I'm going with it.
That is also really cool. In fact, if anybody in the educational world is listening, I would highly encourage, if you could, create some either business or healthcare, or some STEM programs within your high school level and provide, college credits, even if they don't go. So, for example, if you create a nursing program, even if you don't go into nursing school after high school, those educations that classes you're gonna be taking are applicable across the board to a lot of different industries. So please think of innovative ways to kind of create these pipelines into these innovative companies, healthcare, science, technologies, anything STEM related.
Yeah.
Pretty.
And that's such a great point. I mean, it makes me think of even my wife. She's in academia in medical research and manages like 10 or 12 people, right? And manages grant funding. And it's almost like she's like essentially running a business with she's the smartest person I know and is a scientist, but doesn't have any of the business background. And some of the challenges she shares with me, I'm like, those are some business problems, not science problems.
Yeah, no, very, very true. Folks know that have listened to the show. I've been in healthcare for over 20 some odd years now. And again, the academic medical center world, if you don't get those grants, then you're not going to be doing any research funding, so you are having to, and again, the grant funding that you receive, then you actually have to hire other assistant researchers to kind of help with the research. So there's quite a bit of process to that. And to Corey's point, it is very much a business. Now, Corey, you started mentioning you started taking entrepreneurial classes in high school. What classes do you remember that kind of stand out, or maybe like topic within the entrepreneurial ecosystem stands out to you the most?
Yeah, some of it was having to stand up a business, and it forced me through the things that I still hate. No offense to my CPA and my finance person in house, but some of the mechanics of accounting and things like that. But if you can't balance things, just like a checkbook on the most basic terms in your household, or that dates me a little bit, but if your bank accounts aren't there's not more money coming in, or at least as much money coming in as what's going out, then you're in trouble just in life. And so having to think about naturally the financial part of it and anchor points, that was the hard part the easier part for me and the things I loved was like, hey, you got to create this fake business and you have to have a product or service you sell and you have to have customers. And so naturally then go down the marketing and product development path or service development. But um, anchoring to the reality of, is this a hobby versus a business, was a reality early on.
Yeah, one of the things for those folks listening, you can check us out, shadesofE.com. We'll have this information there too. But one of the things, Corey, I created was a nonprofit recently, a couple of years ago. Latino founders, our focus is to actually help scale 100 Latino businesses to $1 million reoccurring revenue. And the reason the $1 million of AR is important is because that's really where the founders can, one, pay themselves, and then they can begin to offer their employees a competitive wage. Where do you feel that crux kind of landed for you, where you're like, you know what, this isn't a hobby. This is actually I have a career. I have an actual business.
Yeah. So I came into it with a little bit different journey. I ended up going from employee to owner. So my entrepreneurial journey was a little bit later of how I ended up acquiring an existing business, one that I knew every aspect of because I was running it up to that point. But it really got real for me probably 12 years ago or so when some of the books were opened up to me and some of how we made money and the business was opened up by, and when I got into a smaller agency, which is the one I now own, when I went from, some that were medium size down to, 3 or 4 people, every dollar mattered more. And I could see the level of thinking and how we had to process through that. So um when I started having some of the anxiety or wake up in the middle of the night over things, when I wasn't even the owner, having all the financial risk in it, that's when it really hit home for me of understanding what this really means and how to go and starting to learn and study the phases of size when you're the, one person, which I get to skip in that case, but the 4 or 5 people, and then hitting the next tier of 10 or 12. And hopefully those are linked in a healthy way, ratio wise, to more importantly, milestones and not people as how you judge it, in terms of revenue growth, and hopefully not just revenue growth on the top line, but profit on the bottom, as well. And so all those things became really real for me when I was living them and operating the business, or at least getting close to the people who were, with a lot of transparency.
Yeah, and one of the things, I know it's simple, folks, and I'm pretty sure people are like, of course, revenue and profit. There's two different lines, right? Now, I think you hear a lot, especially in today's in news. Oh man, they have record-breaking revenue, right? But that doesn't necessarily turn into profit. The healthcare, let's take with the healthcare industry in particular. The healthcare industry is going through a very tremendous turmoil moment, right? From a financial perspective and all sorts of things. Now, even though a lot of some of these hospitals are actually making a massive amount of revenue, the cost to do business has outpaced the actual revenue in a lot of hospitals and a lot of states. And so when you start thinking about you're, oh man, I'm making a lot of revenue. To Corey's point, and I started doing this with the podcast recently as well. I actually brought in an employee, and so now I have myself like an annual budget. Here's how much I had in the bank account. Here's how much I'll be making, on a month to month or whatever as the income comes in. But then here's also my expenses. And you want to make sure you're identifying everything. My lighting, my computer desk, my microphone, my mouse for the laptop, all these little things. Because one of the things, Corey, as I started to do this, I'm like, holy crap, I've paid a lot of money for this dang podcast, and it's those little things that you kind of begin to. Now, what was when you started going through that book process and you started being able to, get under the hood and tear the things up? What were some of the most surprising things for you? Again, you're coming in as an employee, not an owner, but you also said you're kind of going through that anxiety. What were some of those things that you're having anxiety about? And then what were you kind of surprised about seeing the finances?
Well, a couple of things that I addressed over the past few years. We were, to your point, some of those things get hidden, and the bigger you are, the more things get hidden. So at 20 something people, right? And several $1 million, it's you those small line items that look small, $79 a month for software, well, times like 50 pieces of software, that how many of those has no one logged into in the past year that just didn't get canceled, or bad contracts where bigger chunks are, you have no flexibility for that. But so some of those hidden expenses, small things that add up, that are magnified if you're one or two people but aren't otherwise. And then categorically also, being in a service-based industry as a marketing agency, I've got 30, 40, 50, at that time 70 something clients, and how spread thin we were, and look at some clients getting too much attention, other clients not getting enough, and understanding where on that side of things, and then on delivery of the service, but then also on the other hand, employees that are in service lines that are underutilized versus over. We were a full service agency, so we were doing everything for everyone, everything from branding to print design to websites, and everything under the digital marketing umbrella, from search engine optimization, Google ads, social media, email marketing, content creation, and copywriters on staff, and all of that. And none of those were ever fully utilized. And were we honestly the best in North America at all of those things? No, right? We weren't doing any malpractice for our clients. We were maybe good, but were we better or best if you were to categorize those services? No. And so it's hard to charge a premium or be that premium provider and specialist if you're a commodity. And that applies to so many different industries. And we see it, in healthcare as well. And you got to know your numbers and understand where you make money, where you're 5-star versus 3-star, or where, personally on the entrepreneurial side of it, also, is this something you love to do? Is your passion there, or does it drain you? Like social media, after Facebook had a bunch of security incidents on their end that burned some of my clients and burned us, like, I don't care if we don't do social media ever again. I mean, it's not a passion for us. It was a drain and a distraction from things where we could show our expertise and we could have the best impact for our clients. So it's a whole range of things, but categorically there's, 3 to 5 buckets and almost levers you can pull, where you can have losses in one or more, or huge gains depending on how you analyze it.
Yeah, no, I love that entire mindset. It's the correlation coefficient, and that's what we call it in healthcare. So what I mean by that, folks, the correlation coefficient is what is the lowest hanging fruit. So now in healthcare, let's again, sticking with healthcare, let's talk about like patient satisfaction scores. We actually, hospitals, many people don't know this, but hospitals actually get judged on their patient satisfaction scores, and it actually trickles down to the financial rebates and how much money they get returned. So if I'm looking at my patient satisfaction scores and I'm realizing, you know what, this specific question, how noisy is it, right, in the patient's room, that is actually moving the bar quite a bit. So let me just focus on that one problem. Okay. And so what did we do? Well, one thing we did was we noticed all the handicap buttons that we had were the push buttons. Well, when you walk outside of a unit, you slam those things and it is very loud. Patients are trying to rest. So what did we do? We changed all of those to the sensors. So you just walk by and you wave your hand and the door opens. Noise complaints go down, patient satisfaction scores go up, right? That's that correlation coefficient. So, and I also love what Corey is identifying. He's like, listen, we had core competencies in all these areas, right? And I think this is a good learning opportunity for all, not only entrepreneurs and small business owners, but also for nonprofits, because I think a lot of times nonprofits will chase grant funding and they'll alter their true north to align with the grant funding. And next thing you know, you have 6 different or 8 different tactics that you're trying to do, and it's actually pulling away from that zone of genius, that area that you are truly focused on. As Corey mentioned, that when you're doing it, you don't get burned out, you just love doing it. This is what you were passionate about doing in the first place. If it pulls you away from that, right, and you get pulled away from that, as you get pulled away from that, and you'll also start to lose your quality of your zone of genius, because again, you're now focusing just on core competencies. This is also a strategy larger organizations do. So, for example, if I know my zone of genius is complex surgery, Yet I have a competitor. They're going to build a surgical center. They're not doing complex surgeries. They're going to maybe just do like, bread and butter surgeries out in a different community. I will strategically build a competing site at that location just to make sure to keep them true to themselves. Like, hey, if you want to battle for just the general surgery, we can do that. But at the end of the day, my focus is still the complex surgery. But I'm only doing that just to kind of be competing with that volume. Because at the end of the day, I don't want to give them all the volume, right? I don't want them. So again, there is some strategic plays to it, but you don't want to get too ahead of your skis from a financial perspective because if you're to Corey's point, if Salesforce does a remarkable job with this, where they will open up millions of different accounts within a larger organization. And next thing you know, you have, like Corey was mentioning, a $70 monthly account here, $70 monthly account here. Next, you have 200 employees, two different accounts. None of them talk to each other, and Salesforce is reaping it in. So that's another thing. Just as you grow, just be mindful of that. Now, Corey, take us through the process of, again, at this point, you're still an employee. Tell us about that transition. What was that transition? What kind of happened that you became the employee to the owner?
Yeah. Go back to 2014, maybe. I, started having a conversation about what my career goals were long term. And it was kind of first presented to me of, hey, would you want to be an owner someday? And so that stuck with me. I started thinking that way. Fast forward, I got recruited away to another agency, and then I ended up boomeranging back to Voltage. And when I came back, we looked at a new role where I was kind of the number two, and we started actually talking about it in the conversation of me coming back on with them, of what that looked like. And we got busy. We tripled top line, doubled staff, and it was just on the back burner. But we got to a point where we said, time out. All right, we have runway, we have time. Let's start figuring this out now. Because I was also doing a lot of the new business work and I didn't want a commission. I was on a commission. So I'm like, I'm working against myself on what this is going to cost and then being able to buy into it. And so we got some trusted advisors in place to really help us work through that. We started talking to our attorneys. They weren't, the most helpful. They're like, here's a legal framework for how you could do this. We're like, we need some coaching and help with the transition and what we do and ways to structure this. So worked with a group that we had known for years, called Agency Management Institute. And they had, knew our business exactly, seeing hundreds of agencies and their books and going through this and guiding people through it. So they came alongside us and really helped us with a 1-year transition plan and the whole framework for how we would work through it to not have any missteps with clients or our internal culture, and to get through the things that, because it's not something you do every day. And to be able to step through that and get through it and have it be successful in the front end and the back end.
Tell us a little bit about the legal paperwork. Talk about some of the things that made it surprise you. Like, man, I didn't really think we had to think about this.
Yeah. So the good news is we didn't have to go as deep into some of the due diligence, because it was an internal deal, and any of the skeletons in the closet, if you will, I knew them, or maybe, because I was running the company, I was more ingrained in the day to day than the owner at that point as the president and running operations. So, and doing all the sales and being the chief strategist. So, that wasn't as bad, but man, there are so many hoops to jump through with, if you're doing financing or SBA or anything else, so you have the government and a bank involved, and lawyers on both sides. So while it was a friendly deal and we were good friends, and there's still certain number of documents and agreements and things that have to be buttoned up and red lines going back and forth, and the more unfamiliar any entity, from a lawyer or an accountant or anybody who's involved in the process on either side, the more unfamiliar they are with the inner workings of, in my case, how a marketing agency works, the more challenging it is, right? There's nuance to how healthcare firms work, and how the books are structured and how the balance sheet looks versus a marketing agency versus a car dealership, right? In terms of, or whether there's real estate involved or not, and all those different parts and pieces to it. And so, that was a little bit of a surprise too, of where how high the legal fees racked up, kind of with the amount of back and forth in what was a deal that was pretty easy. The good news is we used the same CPA firm who works with agencies and knows our books on both sides. We were able to share some of those resources where we didn't have to build walls between each other and have hardcore negotiations. But still, there's so, even in an internal deal, so many things to manage and like a second job to work through it.
Yeah, and the interesting thing when you're going through this process, folks, is you really are kind of divvying it up. Like if XYZ happens, then A, B, and C happens. And it's almost like you're kind of going through if one of the partners expires, okay, what happens with that share? If legality issues arise, what is your share? Because for example, some individuals may come in with financial backing, other individuals may come in with hours, like Corey mentioned, like being a CEO, being a CFO, being a chief strategist, going out and getting business, that takes a lot of hours and time. Okay, well, what does that quantify as far as equity goes, right? And those conversations are interesting. And not only that, but the exit strategy. Okay, what happens when we want to leave? And typically, as folks, again, check out the shadesofE.com, but typically the exits happen because either a financial or a family, some type of personal thing occurred, somebody passed away, or they decided to retire. It tends to be kind of sporadic sometimes. It's never really planned. So having at least some type of framework around that to help get you through it is definitely going to be beneficial. Now, Corey, you bring in this. You're now owner of the new company or past company that you've been an employee for. How does that transition? Like, how do you kind of keep the culture of the team going during that transition? Or was everybody like, all right, that's another day, let's go?
Yeah, the good news is part of that plan that we put together, that 1 year transition plan, kept things private until we got far enough in and had our, LOI in place, and then even got through, some of the financing hurdles. So we knew it was a 90%, 95% deal. And then we shared it with the team. But the good news was, in my case, that I was already running the show and people were already reporting to me. And so we formalized that. And we also backed out the now previous owner down to, 2 or 3 days a week. And he was already scaling that down intentionally, but nobody else really knew that or realized that, just to get people used to it and have smaller incremental change that people could get used to and we could see reactions to and we can manage around. But the good news was, culturally, it was already our organization, because of the size, was already bigger than just the owner, thankfully, and it remains that way today. And so that was easier for me. And actually, when we went through that too, we used it as an opportunity to revisit our mission, vision, and values and bring the entire team into that conversation, so it wasn't unilateral. We acknowledged that their changes were happening, and we wanted to be able to give a forum and some ownership, if you will, to the full team of some of the aspects of culture, to kind of double down on emphasizing that this place is bigger than just one person.
Yeah, I really like your guys' approach, like a soft runway, right? Like, having the phase of the owner phasing out, waiting a year for it to communicate, but at that same time, you're taking on more and more responsibility. So the transition didn't seem, because I do, especially if like it's a merger and acquisition and a whole new organization comes in and takes over, and thankfully for your team, it seems like you knew the culture already. But having someone else completely come in and a whole new culture, a whole new management team,
Yeah.
very difficult, very, very difficult.
Yeah, especially if the organizations haven't worked together or haven't, partnered on anything, but even in some of those situations where it seems like a perfect deal, I've seen, things fall apart or go the wrong direction, or the owners become like 50-50 and then nobody could settle a dispute. That was like a blind, you mentioned kind of the structure a minute ago. That was one thing that popped into my head. I've seen too many 50-50 things. And then it's like weird. It's like, what's the brand? How do we really integrate, or are we tiptoeing around some issues and then we let them linger and then they resolve themselves in ways that are less ideal than if you'd been proactive in taking control of them?
Yeah, because there's nobody really that to make the definitive decision without having to rely. Yeah, it's very, very tricky. Now, during this process, did you ever, you're obviously new transition into being an owner. Did you ever have a moment of self-doubt?
Was interesting. I had for the first 3 or 4 months, um, I'm a natural strategic thinker. I came from that side, as I mentioned earlier. I wasn't a creative, which have their own overthinking ways of doing things and taking, not wanting to be put in a box. But I realized in the first few months, one of my biggest challenges was not making quick enough decisions. I'd have people come to me present me with something to make a decision on, big or small. And I'd say, okay, let me think about that. And it would go on a list. And then my list, I never got down to it, or I'd come to it and be like, man, I really want a couple more inputs, but not have the time for that. And I realized quickly that inaction or not making a decision in some cases were more detrimental than making the wrong decision quickly and knowing that I could still roll it back or adapt to it. And there are a lot of great authors and speakers and people who talk about decision making and how many decisions you should make a day or whatever, and knowing that tomorrow you can roll back 2 of those if you need to, and all that. But that was a big deal. I realized how the risks of no decision or indifference versus being proactive and setting a direction for my team, who was all purely looking at me, versus me being able to share some of that with someone else, or do it by committee.
Yeah, that is something that when you become an owner, again, folks, you can check out shadesofE.com. As the nonprofit, we recently hired an executive director and a community manager. And now it's like, okay, we now have an employee. I'm co-founder and president. We got to make sure that we stay financially stable, because now we have 2 individuals that rely on this company to be successful, because their salaries are now tied to it. And that right there, I'll tell you, folks, that is an eye-opening experience, and you certainly kind of feel the weight on the shoulders sometimes. Now, one of the things you also mentioned earlier was the authorship. You actually have also written a book. Tell us a little bit about your book and what can individuals expect to read.
Yeah, so the book is called The Digital Marketing Success Plan, and basically, for anyone who's involved in marketing, digital marketing, in your organization, or maybe you're the owner and you're at least authorizing a budget or overseeing it at some level. So whether you're directly involved or indirectly involved, you can probably attest to some of the mystique and some of the things and acronyms that get thrown around, and some of the well, it's optimization, or it's up to Google, or just trust it, or whatever, types of conversations. And those are not ideal necessarily for making sure that you get return on your investment. So I believe strongly that digital marketing is an investment, and you should expect a return on it like anything else you're investing in, whether it's a piece of equipment in your office, a building, or whatever it might be, or a staff member. It's not the nicest way to talk about a staff member, but you think about it, but you're not hiring someone to not produce or help you with capacity or whatever. So tired of the stories of, well, I got sold this process by this agency or by this employee who had this amazing resume, but then couldn't deliver on it, or just unrealistic expectations. So it all starts with having a marketing plan, and not the plan that takes you 6 months and $600,000 to put together. And not something that you do in 5 minutes, and then you start spending money in Google or Facebook or wherever, and then you find out that it wasn't specific enough, and they're taking your money whether it's working or not, and companies like mine taking your money whether it's working or not. So got to a point where I'm like, well, I need to figure out how to articulate what we do. And it was a moment where I had to get over the hump on whether I wanted to put it out there in the world, my exact process out into the world, to let competitors and everybody else see it. But it got to that point because I just wanted to be helpful and try to change the conversation from, oh, you've proven how it works and what it is, not just the trust me, and put extra pressure on the conversation leading into it. So we created a 5-step framework called START, It's an acronym, and we apply it with our clients, but anybody can pick up the book and find either parts of that process or the whole thing, the whole framework, valuable to work through on your own, to set your strategy, set your goals, evaluate the tactics, make sure you have the assets you need, make sure you have the ability to measure and report against what you're doing, and make sure you have a documented plan so you don't do this exercise and then it gets put on the shelf when you get busy or distracted by something else. So it's a 5-step framework. Typically, I mean, you could go through it in a week. That's probably a lot, but 30, 60, 90 days is pretty typical. And it's all in there, including some maybe nerdy stories where I changed client names and to to allow myself to be fully transparent on different scenarios and situations people went through, which I know will resonate with a lot of people if you're doing any level of this with an outside partner or even someone you've hired onto your team to be in charge of it.
Yeah, I love what you said in regards to being able to adapt to the market quickly, not a subcommittee that's going to take 2 weeks to create a campaign. You really need to adapt quickly. Like, and if you're not capturing that opportunity, somebody else is, because they are adapted. And I keep telling people, you're not going to lose your job to AI. You're going to lose your job to someone using AI because they're more efficient. They can adapt quickly. They can respond to the market. So if I come to you with a strategic opportunity in the market and you say, hey, let's schedule a meeting, you're already behind the time. Like in fact, just this afternoon, I picked up the phone and I called one of our team members in the research world. Like, hey, this is what I need to do. Let's just get together. I don't need a meeting. This is what we need to do. Let's get on the phone. Let's hash it out right now. Let's get the work done. I don't need to have a meeting to talk about what we need to do and then come back and have another meeting about what we talked. It just bogs down the process. Another thing too is I would encourage, especially the executive leaders, bring in your staff to the table. If they're the ones doing the work, it is absolutely pointless for you to have an executive meeting and then go back to have a team meeting, get a summary of the work they're doing, then go back to the executive meeting. It's just it's too long of a process. It's extremely useless, and it's not efficient, and you're losing market share and revenue doing it. Truly, you really have to be adaptable. And I do like not only the adaptability, but also just kind of keeping a framework of your processes and tracking them. Key KPIs, folks, key performance indicators. Those are extremely important because your goal, right? Your goal is one thing. Okay. You have your goal. Now your tactics are what you're going to use to achieve the goal. And your KPIs are going to tell you whether or not those tactics are working to achieve the goal. As Corey was mentioning, it's okay to go in and check Google Ads and see what's working, what's not working, but you want to be strategic about it. I like the 30, 60, 90-day plan style, because I'm okay committing 2 weeks of an ad to see if it works. And if it doesn't, okay, adjust. But you kind of need a little bit of time. You can't just do one ad or for 24 hours and expect that end size is going to be high enough for you to get any type of trend, right? You have to be able to trend your data. Now, once you're able to identify, what's working, what's not, I'll even take it a step back. First and foremost, you have to figure out who you're targeting and how do they like to get marketed to? Where are they at? Are they on Facebook? Like Corey mentioned, I don't care if he does Facebook anymore, right? Well, maybe some people may be on Facebook, some people may not. They might be on TikTok, they might be on LinkedIn, they might be on Twitter, right? There's so many different mediums. They might even just read the newspaper or the radio, right? Understanding who your market is, what medium they use, and then really leveraging and talking to that, and specifically keywords. Now, Corey, I would love to get your input on keywords because I feel like the search engine optimization, right? The digital world, the digital marketing in particular, is very keen on keywords. Can I explain what keywords are, the importance of it, and what people should be thinking about? Because I would assume a keyword is just one word, but tell me exactly what it is. What all goes into a keyword?
Yeah. So hot take incoming. So keywords have been, if you're working with someone who is talking about and focusing on keywords as their goal, to the point you made a minute ago, think about tactics and strategy and things like that, it's probably an outdated strategy. or an outdated approach that they're putting into place from 5 or 10 years ago, when really things started changing from keywords to context and topics. And so right at the heart of the question you just asked, yes, you might hear the phrase keyword, or things related to keywords come out of my team's mouth, but we don't mean a literal one word or 3 word phrase today. Context is so much more important. But I even go back, into examples even 15 years ago where I was able to get, had a high end, independent skilled nursing, and I'm going to use the word facility, but community as a client. But to them, the word facility was the F word, and to them, essentially. So they didn't want to use it anywhere on their site ever, and they didn't want to use the term nursing home either, right? Because they were a higher end nonprofit community with a pub and a theater and curated restaurant, and went for everything from independent living through memory care even to skilled nursing. So ranking for, but how do people search, right? Nursing home, or put the word facility in. And so even 10-15 years ago, we were able to use context, and the search engines were able to know what we were about and rank us for those terms without using them on the site. So those were the early days of really this shift. And now there's so much more into context and entities and understanding contextually about who you are and your authority status in your industry, with the subject matter that you deserve to be found for, and thinking of it that way. So yes, literally, we do have on the ad side specifically too, have to go plug in what keywords we want to target our ads. But a lot of this has been taken over on both the ad side and on the organic side by AI, taking it even 100 steps further from where it was 10 years ago when that evolution started. So we're talking about concepts, topics, and almost how they're clustered, or how you organize in your content, and what you talk about, and what your expertise is, and all the signals around that, more so than I want to rank for cars in Kansas City where I am. Well, that doesn't probably help you, because that's too big of a base to, even if you're a local car dealership. Well, if you're only a Ford dealership, somebody searching for cars is thinking, I want a Honda. All right, well, that's a problem. If they're thinking, I want to research what a car costs or Blue Book value, that's a problem. That's not your target audience. Somebody in New York searching, that's not your target audience. So even if you got that ranking, that holy grail ranking, for that one keyword, it's misguided. So understanding really where people are in their research versus looking for doing competitive analysis down to buy now mode, all those things considered will trigger different ways people search and consume content and get to you. So that's a long answer to kind of blow up the concept of keywords, but it's just so much bigger than just what it was back then. And I would run, not walk, run from someone who's trying to stuff individual words and phrases into a website nowadays, especially because if it doesn't get you flagged for spam, it's still just a wasted exercise and looks bad to someone visiting your site, and it's not going to work.
Yeah, it's like when you go visit a site, folks, you kind of have to. It's the funnel, right? You're going to take them down this journey, right? And at each one of these sections in your website, again, check out the sageofv.com. I know I can do a better job, but give you an example is it's all funneling you down to subscribing, right? Either listening to the episode or subscribing. But at every section, there's a value proposition and a call to action, right? Entrepreneurial educational podcast. The reason I have that is because that's usually what people are going to Google, right? Is education. Again, that's the podcast. And then also trying to find value statements, like phrases like Corey was mentioning. So like, for example, this episode might really be focusing on like, learn about digital marketing from an expert, Corey Morris, right? Because that's what we're going to do. We're talking about specifically Corey Morris. We'll also put his title and his business. So, because that also has that search engine. They probably know the search engine knows Corey. They know his business. They know his title. So now they're going to be drafting that information over to me. In addition to that, the learn, the how to, those are like, I want everybody to think about when you go to Google and you're trying to think of something, if you're searching something, that's the way you should be kind of writing your key or your phrases, because that's really, again, how do I do this, or entrepreneurial network event near me, and trying to make sure that those are the things that you call out. Now, you mentioned, the keywords are kind of going in the past. Where do you see digital marketing going, especially with AI here in the next decade?
Yeah. So a trend started even before COVID of less and less traffic coming through from searches in Google. So the zero click search phenomenon had started prior to that. So that's been going on for a while. AI has helped accelerate it. So we're seeing less and less traffic come from Google. Not necessarily a bad thing. Again, if our focus is on the conversion point or the business outcome point of it, and quality of that traffic versus more of a vanity metric of how many people came and visited versus how many got through the funnel to the bottom. So while there's less traffic, are we getting the same results and getting the right traffic? So we're not throwing it out there to the masses, but we're more hyper targeting the people that matter, that we wanted to be talking to from the start. And so some of that's been happening. AI has helped disrupt that even more, and Google's not helping itself with its antitrust things and all the diversification things coming. But what the opportunity is, we now have more places to ask questions and get information from. And so AI search functions, AI models and engines are now places that more and more people are getting comfortable with asking and prompting and getting information out of. So that's the new frontier where a lot of this is happening, and a lot more is going to be automated. So understanding not just to go focus on Google, and it's always been, for the last 15, 20 years, it's been heavily in Google because they have such a huge market share. But now looking at the diversification of sources of how people find information, consume information, we thought smart speakers might be one day killing, voice search was going to kill using the browser or mobile devices, but they all still went to a search engine endpoint. Search engines are integrating their own AI aspects. They all have their own platform or partnerships with others, and others have emerged, and they're all challenging each other. So whether we have one behemoth win out and push everybody aside, or we've got 15 different sources that we have to make sure our content is in and found in, it's a new frontier, a new opportunity, and those who embrace it as a positive challenge and not the negative thing that we have to deal with will be there in 10 years and be able to tell a story of how maybe they're the leading brand now, where in some of the traditional marketing and advertising channels, they couldn't compete with, a pharmaceuticals $1 billion advertising TV budget, if you will.
Yeah. And it's kind of funny. It's funny you kind of mentioned that, like, we're seeing less and less Google. I have found myself, I'll be completely transparent here, folks. I have found myself utilizing like ChatGPT or Gemini, some other AI, anything but Google, to say like, hey, what are the best computer desks, or what's the best, computer chair, or what's the best microphone for podcasts, or what's the, like, give me the top 10, kind of thing. And it'll spit out, whatever that it believes, or some articles or things I can reference to. But it's almost, I completely have gone away from Google, because I kind of get away from the static. It's all now in one kind of nice documented area where it's all cleaned up and it's specific to that topic, versus kind of like grabbing all sorts of things and kind of putting in there. And it is really
a great memory too.
Yep. Yeah. And I think too, to your point, what I believe we'll see in the future, and this is one thing I've been kind of working on, especially with the SaaS world, is how do I create essentially a hub, right? So train the AI for anything. So let's say, for example, you're a trainer, right? And you're always getting asked these specific questions and regulations and policies about training, but they're different in every state. Well, you can actually create an AI software that has all this information, and then you can actually go sell it to personal trainers, so then they can use it for their clients. So then they sound smarter, better, right? More articulate. But really, it's just they're using an AI that's very specific to that niche, right? And I think that's where you're going to start to see in the future is these hubs, these AI hubs that are very specific to a niche that then are created as SaaS products that can be sold to individuals that have clients or possibly the clients themselves, grow direct to consumer. But nonetheless, I really do see that the AIs, we're just
Oh
scratching
yeah.
the surface.
Yeah, that's a category I didn't even touch on yet, right? Because there's AI built into search engines now. There's the native LLMs and AI platforms themselves. But yeah, the future of how SaaS companies and all the tech that we use, from some of it's scary, right? And some of it, I'm not sure I want my car making those decisions yet, but they are. It's there
Yep.
in a lot of vehicles and things like that now too, to get an example way out in left field. But yeah, and to your point, how much we train it is a big thing. So I've tested so many different platforms, but I'm still in Chat GPT because I probably invested 100 hours training it, and now it's scary good at being me.
Yeah. Yes.
Or and being me in a way that's not scary to me, but but it helps me scale. Anything that I don't have time to do, don't want to do, or need a kickstart in figuring out, it's a
Mhm.
great place to start. Things that I was thinking 3 or 4 years ago about hiring a virtual assistant to do, it reduces the challenge of that because it's instant,
Yep.
right? I'm polite to it, as even though it's technology, but
Yeah.
I can in real time influence this versus having to go back and forth potentially across time zones or even just across different communication channels, in terms of getting efficiencies.
Yeah. And some examples for that, folks, is like doing RSVP for a dinner at an out of state location. You don't know any of the restaurants, right? We're the top 5 restaurants in this location for these people at this time available, this date. Spit you out some examples. Outlines. I love using it for outlines. Like, hey, I need to this is what my focus is. This is how, help me start it out. Right. To your kind of point.
Yeah.
I just need a starting point. Now, Corey, there's folks listening on how can folks, first and foremost, who's the typical client for your team? These folks might be interested in your service. And then how can people get in contact with you and figure out more about your guys' business?
Yeah. So, we have narrowed our focus purely to search marketing and websites. So SEO and Google Ads or paid search, PPC, and building websites. We will do a comprehensive digital strategy on the front end that includes all the channels, even the ones that we don't do in house. And we'll bring in other partners, trusted partners who are at the same level we feel like we are in search or web, alongside if needed, or to work through that planning process and strategy process and put it in the hands of our clients. So that allows us to serve a wide range of industries as well. But I will say that we have worked with a number of healthcare focused organizations, from academic medical centers and hospital systems to one person clinics across different specialties to even healthcare focused nonprofits, and on both the grant making and grant funded side, community health organizations, and a wide range in between. And so we know the unique challenges of compliance and all the different things that go into a lot of it. But in many cases, it's service-based businesses who are looking for more leads or more, that's the bottom of the funnel, is somebody to schedule an appointment or consume content or work their way through whatever it is in terms of your expertise and how you drive revenue. So we use those channels and the marketing expertise for that. And that's through my agency, which is called Voltage, which you can find at voltage.digital. But separately, I've got a different website for the book, because I don't want you to feel like you're going to get sold to anywhere. You won't on Voltage. But the book is called The Digital Marketing Success Plan. That's a really long domain name, so it's shortened to the DMSP.com, and you can find the framework. You can find a quick link over to Amazon to grab it if you're interested, and reach out to me personally over there as well.
Perfect. And again, folks, we'll have this all on the newsletter. So make sure to subscribe on the shadesofE.com. So we'll have Corey's book. We're going to have the voltagedigital.com. We're going to have all that information. We'll also have a blog post, and he'll have an independent page with the audio and video. For those Patreon members, you'll have access to this video a week early, as well as the transcription. So please go ahead and click on that Patreon button, just $5 a month. It will help support the show. It also allows us to bring on guests, pay for all the digitals, sponsorships, and all that other fun stuff. Now, Corey, are there any last words you would like to say before we go?
I would say if you have any question of whether your digital marketing or any dollar that you're spending on any digital marketing or website tactic or thing or strategy is working or not, I would say time out, grab the book. I'll send you a copy for free. Feel like, hey, I don't even want to put $10 into this. I'm burnt out. I don't want to think about it. Please reach out. I'll get you a copy, because we have the power to know. And in fact, that's the headline on my newsletter that went out today is we don't have to think, we have the power to know digitally. And one of the recent articles I wrote for Search Engine Journal was about mapping KPIs, marketing KPIs to business outcomes and getting that deeply integrated so we can look at it as an investment. So if you don't feel like it's an investment, it's okay. Take a step back, take a deep breath, grab some content that will give you a fresh perspective and run with it.
I love it. And I'm definitely going to have to check out your book just because I'm like neck deep in the digital world trying to figure out what the heck is going on. I still don't know anything. In fact, my wife tells me I do not know much at all the time. Now, again, Corey, thank you again so much. For those folks, again, listening, check out the shadesofE.com. Make sure you subscribe. You can also visit us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, and then you will be able to see this video on YouTube as well as the audio version. So there'll be an audio and the video version there embedded on the shadesofE.com. So again, folks, don't forget to subscribe. Thank you, and have a great night.